My next guest is no stranger to politics, and her work has centered around issues related to gender inequality, sexual harassment, and lack of diversity in the workplace. She was an assistant to President Barack Obama and chief of staff to First Lady Michelle Obama. Tchen is now president and CEO of Time's Up Now and the Time's Up Foundation, organizations committed to make work safe, fair, and dignified for all women. Tina, great to see you. We have history. We've had some great conversations in the past. So we've had a very sobering, wonderful, exciting set of conversations all day about what's been achieved and what hasn't been achieved in the 100 years since the 19th Amendment was passed. And the right of women to vote. You've gone before that. You said you have lots of other rights and dignity matters as well. So give us a state of play with what you've achieved with Time's Up and what is the lift you still have?
Well, Steve, it is so great to see you, at least virtually, and just sort of virtually be with you. We've shared wonderful conversations and times together during my time in DC. And thank you for doing this. This is an important conversation, and I love that you are celebrating this century of women, but we have so much more to do because, the reality is getting the vote was just the beginning. And in fact, when 100 years ago, white women got the right to vote, it took, women of color, another half century to do that, which is an example about, you make one legal change and there's still yet more to do. The issue of sexual harassment that Time's Up, was born out of is a good example because it's been over 30 years since the Supreme Court ruled that Title VII outlawed sexual harassment as a form of sex discrimination. And if you've worked for a major company in the last 30 years, you've gotten sexual harassment training. But yet we still had that moment almost 3 years ago to this month coming up in October when, the New York Times and the New Yorker ran that incredible reporting about Harvey Weinstein that cracked open the dirty little secret that sexual harassment is prevalent and happening everywhere. And, shoved under the covers by settlements and secret settlements or women who are too afraid to come forward. And that really broke wide open 3 years ago as an example of how legal change isn't enough, right? Because we have to keep working to secure those legal rights, which is why we started the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund as the first initiative from Time's Up. But more than that, we need to really change our workplaces, Steve, because if you want to get to a workplace where everyone is treated with safety and dignity and respect, then you've got to deal with all of the barriers that keep women and people of color and disabled workers, LGBTQA plus workers from succeeding in the workplace. Things like unequal pay, unequal fair pay and promotion, unequal hiring practices, all of the things that actually we're seeing exacerbated during this pandemic and economic recession we're experiencing.
Tina, we've all been lamenting the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And some of us have been asking, what if she'd had another 20 or 30 years? What else would have been on the docket to try and achieve? You mentioned a few of those things. And sometimes when you try and think about what is right, what is just, what, comes with human dignity, it's remarkable the number of things that, can be called, not part of the constitutional context. I mean, I'm just wondering, when you think about her passing, how fragile are the rights and laws protecting women right now? What are your concerns? And what does that docket that Ruth Ginsburg would have continued to pursue look like from your perspective?
Oh, well, Steve, first of all, let's just honor what she did in her life, which was to change the docket of the framework, right? Before she started her work at the ACLU Women's Rights Project, women really weren't recognized in the Constitution. We weren't seen as, a class to be protected under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. She dreamed that legal strategy up and pursued it smartly and got the court bit by bit, case by case, to recognize women and discrimination against women as something that was unconstitutional. It's something that we who are working women now owe our lives, our ability to sign a credit card in our own name, sign a mortgage in our own name, have the workplace protections that we have. We owe those all to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the experience that American women have in our daily lives now in so many ways. And the idea that one woman could have, really propelled us into where we are today shows you, what one person can do. But then also, to your point, shows you how quickly many of these things, can go away. Whether, in fact, obviously, women's health choices and the integrity of women's ability to make our own decisions about our own healthcare, about our own bodies, about our own reproductive functions, something that has a tremendous effect on women's economic power and our ability to define our own destiny. That's clearly hanging in the balance right now. And she spoke powerfully about what it means and what the impact of the kinds of anti-abortion cases that were coming through the courts meant for women. Birth control issues are also on the table and on the line, and the ability, as we worked for in the Obama administration, to provide free birth control provided by employer-based healthcare, to workers, again, enabling women to be in the workforce, to control their own reproductive health. That's in danger right now. You start to go down the line of LGBTQA, making sure that our protections for workplace discrimination apply to transgender workers as well. All of these things are in the balance.
Earlier at the beginning of this last hour, we had Lilly Ledbetter and Rosa DeLauro, your good friend Rosa DeLauro, talking about equal pay, equal rights, and the lawsuit that really led to the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. An incredible moment to listen to her story. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to, because I think we're storytellers. You're a storyteller. I want both women listening to this show today, but also men, to get a deeper understanding of the stress and anguish and the demeaning nature of discrimination. I know you've been discriminated against in your career, as Asian. And I'm just interested, can you share any of your personal story, your frustration, and then how you whacked it?
Well, here's the thing, as a woman of color, as you know, Steve, I was a corporate lawyer for most of my career. I spent over 2 decades at a large national corporate law firm. I was most of the time in my career, the only woman in the room, the only person of color in the room. I often tell young people, the story of being, walking into the room for a meeting called really solely for the purpose of briefing me about a key case, because I was a litigator for a client, and having all of the attention paid to my white male partner who brought me in. But he brought me in because actually he didn't know anything about what the client needed. This was all for my benefit. And it wasn't until, half an hour into the meeting when they said, like, what now, what do we do, after they've explained their issue? And they're looking at him and he's like, well, I don't know, you got to ask her, that they all turned their chairs around to look at me. And it's those kinds of moments that you realize, when you walk in the room, you're not walking in the room with the same bona fides in people's eyes as the white male who's walking in the room. But, as women, we can't let that get inside our heads. But here's the thing about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When you read her dissent in Lilly Ledbetter, it's those kind of moments, Steve, that she understood. That was the lived experience she brought to the law. Because what was remarkable about that Lilly Ledbetter opinion is, remember, the Supreme Court rules that Lilly's out of time because she can't sue for unequal pay because it happened way earlier in her first paycheck, not in years later in the last paycheck when she first discovered it. And Justice Ginsburg writes in that opinion about how that's not the way women's experience at work manifests itself. It's the little changes. It's the little indignities. It's the little things where you're not even sure whether you're really being discriminated against because you want to give your employer the benefit of the doubt. And so you let that unequal paycheck go by. She wrote a dissent in a similar case on race discrimination that a woman brought against Ball State University. And the Supreme Court said, just because she was suing the supervisor's actions wasn't held to employer, because the supervisor didn't have the right to hire and fire. And she writes, in that opinion, similarly, women experience these things because the supervisor is, going to make comments against her, assign her to a bad workplace. But a woman can't really contest the supervisor, but the supervisor has the power from the employer. So we shouldn't look at these legal constructs so narrowly, devoid of what the actual experiences of workers in the workplace. And that's what Justice Ginsburg brought to the law, was the lived experience of a woman who had experienced discrimination herself, who, wasn't, able to be hired by law firms when she graduated from law school, experienced all of those indignities along the way. And she brought that lived experience to the law. And that's what we're missing. And that's what we need. Someone recently pointed out to me, she was only one of 2 civil rights lawyers in the history of the court to be on the court. We will now have lost her voice, not just as a pioneering woman justice, but as a civil rights lawyer who understands those issues. And that's a perspective we will lose from the court unless she's replaced by someone who shares that perspective.
Tina, just going to squeeze in one more question real quick, if I can. You know, when I've been thinking a lot about children and how they get wired the way they are, how they get pushed in tracks where they go, you know, how do they become who they become? And you had helped set up the White House Council on Women and Girls, which President Trump has dismantled. And I'm just interested in why and what the implications are of that. And, you know, are we doing what we should be doing as national leaders here in Washington to encourage constructs for the healthy development and evolution of women and girls?
No, it's an important question, Steve. Well, first of all, you know, we set up the White House Council on Women and Girls because we wanted to make sure every part of the federal government paid attention to the needs of women and girls. And we pushed that from the White House, and they had that message from the president. And sadly, it's not only the undoing of the Council on Women and Girls in the current administration, but it's also the unraveling of key protections for women and girls. You know, this current Department of Education has undone the protections that we put in place for students who are suffering from sexual abuse on campus. And we know from study after study that 1 out of 4 young women who go to college today will experience sexual assault and violence before she leaves her college career, which, as the mother of a college-aged kids, is horrifying. They've dismantled that. They've dismantled the protections we put in place for federal workers who complain of sexual harassment. You know, they're dismantling so many of those issues. But on the other front, just to speak, because we are in a moment now of, you know, the campaign that's going on, Steve, one of the things we're doing at Time's Up is we have a campaign we're running right now called We Have Her Back, which is to call out sexist and racist and misogynistic language and coverage about women leaders running for political office on both parties. Because that, to your point, is what our kids are watching. That's what they're hearing. And when they hear women leaders called phony, or worse, or that they're commented on more about their personal past or what they're wearing than what their experience is, when they're denigrated with the kinds of name calling that goes on when women leaders put themselves out there in the campaign trail, that's the message our kids get about women's leadership. That's the message that, you know, people who are running companies get when they look at a woman leader. It's one of the reasons, I think, why there's not a single Black woman CEO of a Fortune 500 company right now. This affects, you know, political discourse is so pervasive, and what we do and say in that arena affects what our kids think about women leaders, what other people think about women leadership, what, you know, a young waitress who wants to aspire to be running that restaurant she works in, what that restaurant owner thinks about her and whether she can be a leader. And so hashtag We Have Her Back. You can text her back to 30644 to learn more about it from Time's Up. It's something I feel passionate about for the very reason you asked the question. This is how we are shaping the future and shaping what our kids know and understand about how women and men should be able to work together.
Tina, we're grateful. Tina Tchen, President and CEO of Time's Up Now. We're very grateful for you sharing your candid thoughts and experiences with us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, wonderful to be with you, Steve. Thank you.